Hello and welcome. In this Xcode tutorial, you're going to get familiar with the development environment that you'll be building apps in. I'll show you where to download Xcode and how to start a new app project. And then we're going to go through the major areas of Xcode and then what each of the files in your app project is for. And then finally, we'll wrap up the lesson with some quick tips on how to navigate around in Xcode. In case this is your first time here, hi, my name is Chris and welcome to Code with Chris, the place to be if you want to learn how to make an app. Now, before we dive into the wonderful world of Xcode, I have a quick question for you. Have you tried to learn how to make an app before? And if so, how did that go? Let me know by leaving a quick comment below, and on your way down there, if you wouldn't mind, please hit that thumbs up button because it helps this video out more than you know. So thank you for that. All right, with that said, let's dive in. Let's start by talking about where to get Xcode. It's free, so you don't need to pay for it. Just launch the Mac App Store on your computer and then search for Xcode. You're going to get to a page like this in the search results. Click into it and you're going to be able to download it for free. So I've already got it downloaded, so that's why it says update here. I want you to just ignore the warning here. It's actually a very large app with a lot of different features. It's understandable that there are a few bugs, and if you look at the reviews, there are people complaining about other things unrelated to the app. They're complaining about the way Apple is running their business and so on and so forth, and some of these are very, very old. Okay, I want you to take note of this important information. Click on this just to make sure what the requirements are to install Xcode, and also double check that you have enough free hard drive space. Now, in my experience, it actually takes more hard drive space over time than what it says here. So if you have something like 12 gigs free, it might not let you install this because during the installation process, it actually takes up more space, and then I think it gets rid of a bunch of files and it stops at this size. However, over time, when you download additional developer components and additional iOS simulators, this can actually get even higher. So make sure you have sufficient hard drive space. All right, so if for some reason you can't get access to the Mac App Store, you can also visit the official Xcode page on the Apple developer site. So the URL is developer.apple.com/Xcode. And you can immediately click on the resources link up here, and then you'll be taken to a page where you can download Xcode here. It just takes you to the Mac App Store actually. You can also download beta versions of Xcode. Now, I wouldn't recommend this because oftentimes it actually is pretty buggy, their beta software. So I would recommend to stick with the official releases. If for some reason you want to download an older version of Xcode, you can scroll down here and you can click this link here. Now, just a note, in order to download beta versions of Apple software, you need to be enrolled in their Apple developer program, which we talked about in the previous lesson. To download older versions of Xcode, I don't think you need to be enrolled in that program. I think you just need a free Apple ID. And lastly, if you are on a PC or you're running Windows, check the resources in the beginning of the course for options for you. All right, so now take the opportunity to download and install Xcode if you haven't already, and then launch it for the first time. During your first launch, it's going to ask you for your administrative password to install additional development components. You're going to want to do this, so go ahead and enter in your admin password. After you've done that, let's continue on with the rest of the video. All right, so now let's talk about how to start a brand new Xcode app project. This should be the first welcome screen that you see when you launch Xcode. If you don't see this, don't worry, you can always go to File, New, and choose Project. Otherwise, from this welcome screen, you can go ahead and click Create a New Xcode Project from here. From here, you're going to choose a template for your new project. You're going to configure the project properties for this, and then you're going to choose a place to save it. So let's start by choosing a template. The most basic one for our purposes is under iOS and App. So go ahead and choose that and hit Next. And then here you're going to configure the properties for your project. So if you don't have a team here, don't worry. Later on, you can add your Apple account here, and then you can configure the team for the project. One thing that you will want to make sure of though is to set your organization identifier here. If you have a business or a website, you can use a reverse domain style name here, com dot whatever that may be. And you could even use your first and last name here if you'd want. And then here you'd fill in the name for your app or the product name. So here, if I put in test, you'll see that this bundle identifier is a combination of the organization identifier plus the product name, and this together forms this unique bundle identifier. This bundle identifier is used in different places to identify your app, such as in the App Store, or in the provisioning portal, or in App Store Connect. So this is very important. Don't worry, you can change the bundle identifier for your project later on. I just want to draw your attention to how it's formed and what it's used for. All right, next up, for your interface, you're going to make sure that you have SwiftUI selected. And for lifecycle, you're going to make sure you have SwiftUI app selected. And then finally, for language, choose Swift. And for these options, just leave them all unchecked. Or if they are checked, just uncheck them. Now, a brief note on these dropdowns right here. Over time, as app development for iOS has evolved, there have been a couple of programming languages and also a couple of ways of building user interfaces. The latest and greatest is SwiftUI and Swift, so that's what we want to be using. Let's go ahead and hit next if you're happy with all of your selections here, and then choose a place to save it. I'm just going to save it on my desktop so that it's easy to find. Since I've already got a project there, I was just going to replace it. All right, welcome to your brand new Xcode project. Now, it might seem overwhelming with all of the different panels and areas, but it's actually not so complex once you know how it gets broken down. There are actually only 4 major areas of Xcode. Let's start from the very left. Here we have the Navigator panel, or the Navigator area, and as you can see here, we have a file listing of all of the different files in our app project. The Navigator area actually has different tabs to navigate through different things as well, which we will get to in future lessons. For now, it's set to the first tab, and we have a listing of our files. When you click on a file, it changes what is shown in this big main area, and this is called the editor area. It allows us to edit the files that we choose in the file navigator. You can see that it adapts to the type of file that you choose. If I choose a .swift file, those are code files. If I choose this XC assets file, this is an image library, so it's showing me something like this. The editor area is a place to edit the file that I choose here. So the last tab is on the very right hand side, and this is called the inspector area, and it either shows me additional supplemental information on what I select in the editor area, or it allows me to configure or edit the thing that I select in the editor area, depending on what sort of editor I'm currently working in. So for example, this is a code editor because I'm looking at a .swift file. So when I hover over or select a keyword here, if I'm on this quick help tab, it's showing me some quick information about what that piece of code or keyword is for. The inspector panel also has a couple of different tabs up here. For example, this one is an identity tab. It shows me information about that file that I've got selected, about where it's located and which app it's included in. And if we were building our user interface now, if I were to select one of those elements and go to this tab, it would allow me to configure it. So to sum it up, the inspector panel here is contextual to what you select in the editor area. And the editor area is contextual to what you select in the navigator area. So it all stems from what you select here on the left-hand side first. And then across the top, we have the toolbar here. Let me explain to you what this is. There's a button here on the very left and very right to hide and show the navigator and inspector. These are handy if you don't have a lot of screen real estate. Next thing I want to draw your attention to is in the middle here. This is the status bar. It tells you what's currently happening. What is Xcode doing? Do you have any errors? Do you have any warnings? And so on and so forth. To the left of that, you have a drop down to select a simulator. And this iOS simulator is basically a virtual device that appears on the screen where you can run your app and test it. You don't actually need a physical device. If you do have one, however, and you plug it in and you want to run your Xcode project on your actual device, you'll find that it will be selectable from here once you plug it in. And then to the left of this menu, you're going to see a couple of buttons here to run your project. Hitting this button will actually run your project in the simulator, and hitting this stop button will stop running your project in the simulator. And then all the way on the right hand side, there are also two more buttons. This is the library button, where you're going to find different user interface elements, different ways to modify those elements, code snippets, any assets you've added to the project, the colors that you've specified for your project, and so on. This little library panel is useful to do a search and to quickly select and add things into the editor area. We're going to get to that in the next lesson. But for now, that's the library area. This you probably won't use too much in the beginning. This is a revision or code review sort of button that will show you, if you're using source control, how your files have been changed through time. So those are the four major areas of the Xcode user interface. All right, now let's go over the files in your new project. Let's start from the very top. This is the root node, or it's your project file. If you select it, the editor area will change into this configuration screen for you to edit some of those details that pertain to your project. For example, here's the bundle identifier that's changeable. You can configure device orientation and which devices and which platforms it can run on, things like that. If we go down a level, you can see that there are two folders here. This one is containing all of your code files and project files. This products one contains the output. When you build your app and compile it, it gets turned into this app, which ultimately is that little deployable bundle or package that we send into the App Store. You don't really have to do too much here with this, but that's where it's stored. All right, let's take a look at this file. This will be named after your product name, app.swift. And you can see here with this main tag here, this is the entry point to your app. At this point, there's not too much to configure here. All it really does is create that first view that the user sees, which is content view. And you can see that this name maps to contentview.swift. So let's take a look at this. This file represents the view that the user sees. Now you can create additional views, but by default you get this content view to start with. And yes, it's all code here, so that means that the user interface is generated by code. But also there is a visual way to customize the user interface, which you'll see in the next lesson. Let's move on with our other files. This one, as I mentioned before, is our asset library. This is where we can store the colors for our app, as well as the app icons, as well as any other images that we want to add to our project. We just drag it and drop it in here. This is our image asset. Well, not just images, but asset library. And then we have an info.plist, and this is some additional configuration information for the project. Here we have preview content, and this is another asset library, but these are only for pre-production assets. So only images and text and colors and things like that that you are testing with, as the name preview suggests. If it's an asset that will ultimately make it to the app that you're going to push to the App Store, then you can put it in the asset library here instead. So that's a quick explanation of all of the files in your project in a nutshell. In the future lessons, we're going to dive deeper into each one, and you're going to see how each of these files play a part in the construction of your app. The last thing I want to do in this lesson is to give you a couple of quick tips on navigating around Xcode in terms of going through your files and also in terms of editing code. So first of all, let's talk about navigating around in files. You'll notice these two arrows here. These are really handy because it's going to let you go to the last file you were looking at. And although it seems a little trivial now, when you're jumping around editing in files, this becomes really handy. Instead of having to go and reselect that file from the Navigator, you can just hit back and jump back to that previous file. You'll also notice that you can have multiple tabs here. So you can hold down Control and you can click on a file and you can always choose Open in New Tab. You can also open in a new window if you'd like. So since I already have that as a tab, then it's not going to open a second tab for me. Now, if you want to have things side by side, you can do that as well. So let's say I wanted to look at both these files side by side. So I can close this and then I can go ahead and I can add another editor pane on the right hand side. So I can split my editor area into two editor areas. You can see that here I'm looking at content-view.swift, and for here, let's look at the test app. So they're independent areas. And I might want to just get rid of my canvas, and then I can see both files like that. If you prefer them to be horizontally stacked, you can hold down Option, and you can see that that icon changes, right? If you hit this button again, it's going to add another editor area to the right. So you're going to split into three. Or you can hold down Option and you can add an editor to the bottom instead. So you could do that. You can also do that here. Hold down Option and do that. Now, a quick way to launch a file into a split editor view. So let's say I'm looking at test app and I want to open up content view as a separate editor area. I can hold down Option and click on the file that I want to open in a separate editor view. So those are some of the ways that you can work with your files. Just to recap, you can navigate, you can go back and go forward, you can have different tabs, and then also you can split up your editor area into multiple instances of the editor. Now I want to talk about editing code, because this is a lot of what you will be doing, and the code looks pretty short right now, but it can get longer. So it's handy to know a couple of ways to deal with that. At the top here, you're going to see this sort of breadcrumb menu, and you'll notice that that is the root node, corresponds to that, right? This is a folder or a group. You can see that. And then this is the content view, which is the file that you're looking at, which is here inside test. And here, you can actually click this and you can jump to different sections of your code. You can see that content view matches that, body matches that, right? So this is a great way to jump to different sections in your code file in case your code file gets pretty long. You can also add different comments in here that will correspond to what you see up here. So you can see here, I've created my own documentation and it adds it here. So this is a great way to organize your file. We're going to talk again about this in the future, so don't worry if this is going a little too fast. All right, now I want to talk about this little button here. You've seen me use this to open up the canvas, but you can also open up this mini map right here. And this mini map will show you an outline of your code file. You can drag this to scrub through your code. Unfortunately, I can't do it very much here because this code file isn't very long. But if you had a really long code file, it would show you the outline of that code file down here, and you can navigate really easily by clicking and dragging this. You'll notice that even as I highlight it, it's going to show me the different parts of my code corresponding to what we have here. Again, those were just some quick fire tips. Don't worry if that flew by too fast because we will be using all of these things together in the upcoming lessons. So that's a quick Xcode tutorial to get you started. Not so complicated once you know where things are, right? Just to recap, you found out where to download Xcode and how to start a new app project. You learned what each of the files in your project is for, and you learned the major areas of Xcode, including the Navigator, the editor, the inspector, and the toolbar. Finally, you also learned some quick tips about how to navigate around within Xcode. Now don't worry if it's a little bit overwhelming right now. You'll feel right at home with Xcode as we use it more often together in the upcoming lessons. To help you get settled in, I actually created an Xcode cheat sheet which you can print out and keep by your side as you're learning to use Xcode. To get it, simply go to CodeWithChris.com and either create or log into your CodeWithChris account, and then you'll find it in the resources link in the top navigation of your student dashboard. You can also take this same 14-day challenge on our learning platform, and in doing so, you'll benefit from all of the additional supplementary material and quizzes. In fact, for this lesson, I have a quiz for you to take to reinforce what you've learned today. Okay, finally, as an additional exercise, I want you to try to start your own Xcode project. In the next lesson, we'll be diving into Xcode to build a user interface. So if you don't want to miss that lesson, make sure you've hit that subscribe button below and turn on bell notifications. All right, I'll see you in that lesson. Bye for now.